So we got a few lines down here on Tezayin yesterday, up to Gufa. 6 lines down from the bottom, from the top. The middle of the line. Tezayin Amud Aleph. Gufa. We mentioned earlier in the Gemara, and now we're going to go. The Gemara is going to get into a little more detail. Gufa Amar Rabbi Rav Ami Bar Tevumi. Rabbi Ami Bar Tevumi says, "SUKKAH bebaloi kelim." We said halacha before that if you use for schach worn out clothing, like pieces of clothing, shmatas, we said psula, it's possible. The Gemara wants to know now. So we discussed earlier that it's similar to the kariyamita because it came from an article of clothing which was makabel tumah, even though now it's not makabel tumah anymore because it doesn't have. We'll see in a second in the Gemara, it doesn't have the right size. It's still puzzle to use for kalim. That's what Rabbi Ami Bar Tevumi is saying. So my baloi kalim. What are these baloi kalim that we're talking about? Amar Abaya matlanios she'ein v'hem shalish al shalish. There are these like shmatas, pieces of material that don't have 3 by 3. They are smaller than 3 by 3. I think tvachim, or maybe even finger breadths. Doesn't say here in Rashi. It's finger breadths. Finger breadths. Okay, so it's a very small piece of clothing. Thank you. It's like I guess it's too small to even use it as a patch. It has no use. It's not good for rich people or poor people. So these shmatas are not makabel tumah, but still, Rabbi Ami Bar Tevumi is saying you cannot use them for schach. Okay, Tanya Kavasei Rabbi Ami. Now the Gemara brings a proof from a brisa, similar teaching. Tanya Kavasei Rabbi Ami Bar Tevumi. Machzela shel shifa v'shel gemi. If you have a mat made of certain types of grass, apparently these kinds of grass are soft, or they're good for sitting on. People used to sit on these kinds of grass. So shiareha afal pi shenifchasu b'chashiura ein mesachachin bahen. Even if they became smaller than the minimum size, so every article that is makabel tumah in its when it's a keli, if it comes less than a certain size, then it's no longer these materials that, even though when they're usable they're makabel tumah, if it comes less than a certain size, different materials have different sizes, so then they become not makabel tumah anymore. They lose their status of keli and they lose their status of tumah. But still, this price is saying that these mats, even though they became smaller than the minimum size for tumah, ein mesachachin behen, you still can't use them for sukkah. So it's the same concept as Rabbi Ami Bar Tevumi, that you can't use these shmatas, you can't use these pieces of cloth when they're too small, even though now they're not makabel tumah. Okay? Then we say over here, I think the brisa continues, Machzelas hakanim Gedalia mesachachin ba, ketana ein mesachachin ba. A mat of reeds. So if it's a big, then you could use it for schach. Mesachachin ba. Why? Because if it was a big mat, it's not made for sitting on. It was made for schach. But ketana, then ein mesachachin ba. A small mat of reeds, you cannot use it for schach, because then it was made for sitting on, it was made for laying on, and therefore it's makabel tumah, and you can't use it for schach. Rabbi Eliezer, Aimer, afi mekabelos tumah, even the big one is mekabelos tumah, ve'ein mesachachin ba, you can't use it for schach. Because I guess people still do use it for sitting on. Okay. The Mishnah said yesterday on Tez Vav Amud Aleph, the Mishnah said, the last part of the Mishnah was hachaitit begadish. If somebody dug out of a haystack to use it as a sukkah, it's not good. It's puzzle.
Question about the mats. So if potentially you have those mats that you put on top of your schach, and you were to one day to decide that I'm going to use it to sit on, does that now become like a kli?
So you started off as kosher schach?
I started as kosher schach, but now you started to use it as, I'm putting it on my lawn, I'm going to sit on it and enjoy the sun.
So we had a Gemara a couple days ago, whether or not machshava could change the status of tumah.
Well, because it already started as kosher schach, so
yeah.
machshava is to use it.
So we said
actually using it. It's more than machshava, it's maisa.
Well, maisa means that you changed something in it. But anyways, we said over there that machshava could make it into tumah. So I'm not sure exactly. I don't know, but maybe you could get it out of that Gemara somehow, like if machshava could make it into tumah. Okay, but anyways, the Mishnah yesterday said that achaytit begadish. If you dig out of a haystack So obviously the haystack is tall enough. It's at least 10 tvachim high, the top of it, and you have an area of 7 by 7 tvachim in it. But it's just hay. It's just a pile of straw or hay that's good for schach technically, but it wasn't made as a schach. It wasn't made as a sukkah. It wasn't covering anything. Amar Rav Huna, lo yishanu ela she'ein sham chalal tefach b'meshech shiva. When did we say that a chaytit begadish, somebody digs out of a haystack for a sukkah, that it's no good? That's only if before the haystack was put there was no structure of 1 tefach high by 7 by 7 wide. So if there was something, a structure of 1 tefach high and 7 by 7, and then you piled the hay on top of it, so all you need is that 1 tefach, then it's going to be kosher. Aval yesham chalal tefach b'meshech sheva Raizel sukkah. Why? Because then what's happening is it is a schach. You're covering this area of 1 tefach. Why isn't it? You can't sit in there because it's only 1 tefach. But what's the problem with the sukkah? A sukkah that's not 10 tefachim high is not a problem with the schach. The schach is good. You put a schach over the 1 tefach. The problem is it's a problem with the walls. The walls are not high enough. So when you dig out of this haystack now till you get to 10 tefachim, you're fixing the walls. You're not fixing the schach. But the schach was good the whole time. So therefore, if you had a structure which was 1 tefach high, 7 by 7 wide, and you piled up the hay on top of it, and now you just dug out the other 9 tefachim to get to 10, so now you have 10 7 by 7, so there's no problem.
It doesn't matter whether the walls are at right angles. You think of a haystack as more or less round.
Right. No, well, generally speaking, it's a square. We had the Gemara on DAF Ches that said if it's round, what size it has to be. Remember the whole, all the math over there? That if it's round, it has to be able to fit a square of 7 by 7 in it. Or actually, then we were talking about 4 by 4. But yeah, if you can get a square out of the circle, also it's fine. Okay, so Tanya Nami Hachi, and the Brisa backs this up and says, "Hachaytit begadish lases lo sukkah." If somebody digs out of a haystack to make a sukkah, Raizel sukkah. That's a good sukkah. Right? V'hanan tanan. But we learned in the Mishnah, Eina sukkah. In our Mishnah, we said it's Eina sukkah. And the Lav must be Shmamina. We see from this Kid Rav Huna. Like Rav Huna saying that if there's a tefach to begin with, that's where a haystack you could dig out of it is a good sukkah. But if there isn't the tefach to begin with, then it's not. So the way we came to the conclusion of this Gemara is really by just mentioning that detail. And then we brought Aryai from the Brisa. But there's another way to teach the same Gemara. The Gemara says, Ika de Rami le Mirma. Some ask it as a question, like a contradiction. Some say, the Gemara, it starts off like this. Tanan, we learned in a Mishnah, Chaytit begadish lases le sukkah, ain't a sukkah. Our Mishnah says that if you dig out of a haystack to make a sukkah, it's not a good sukkah. V'hatanya, we have a Brisa which says, Raizel sukkah. So it's a contradiction. Rav Huna says, Lekashya, kan b'sheyesham chalal tefach b'meshech shiva, kan b'she'ein sham chalal tefach b'meshech shiva. Same answer that one is talking about where you had 1 tefach high, 7 by 7, we're on Tez Zayin. We're about to start the Mishnah. And one is where you didn't have that 1 tefach to begin with, therefore it's no good. Because like we said, if there's 1 tefach to begin with, then all you're doing by digging out of the haystack is fixing the walls. But the schach was good all along. But in the case where there was no 1 tefach, so you didn't make schach. You found the schach already there. You didn't put schach on the sukkah. You just dug out from under it, and then the schach just is there without you making it. So it's tasav alei menas, like we said yesterday. Talk to Mishnah. Hamishal shel defanois milmala lamata. If somebody, the word mishalshel means like that you're like braiding it, you're weaving walls. So you're making the walls piece by piece, and you start from the top and you're going down. Okay. Im gavaya min haaretz shleisha tvachim psula. If you finish making this wall and you're still 3 tvachim above the ground, it's puzzle. It's not a good wall.
How do you make a wall from the top down?
So let's say you have a frame, let's say 4 poles, and right, and then you start like, I don't know what material you're using. Let's say you're using some sort of weave, and yeah.
Right. I didn't think of the frame.
Milmala lamata. So we said it's puzzle if there's 3 tvachim, but milmata lamala. If you're going from bottom up, let's say you start from the bottom. Im gavaya asara tvachim. If you get to 10 tvachim high the wall, kshera. You don't have to make it any higher than 10 tvachim, even though the schach is much higher. So as long as you have 10 tvachim of wall, starting from the bottom, you could have a big space as long as your schach is not 20 amos high, like we said in the beginning of the Masechta. Rabbi Yosi Aimer, Keshem shel milmata lamayla asara tvachim. Just like when you start from bottom up, the wall has to be 10 tvachim and not more. Kach milmala lamata 10 tvachim. So too, when you go from top down, it has to be 10 tvachim. So if next to the schach, if you start next to the schach and then it goes down 10 tvachim, even if you have a very big space to the ground, it's a good sukkah, according to Rabbi Yossi. Says the Gemara. But Ma'ikah Miflagi, what's the machlokes over here? What's the point that they're arguing in? Where the Tanakama says you can't have a wall so high, 10 tvachim, it's such a break. If it's 3 tvachim or 3 tvachim and certainly more, it's not good. And according to Rabbi Yossi, you could have a lot of space. But Ma'ikah Miflagi, Mar savar mechitza tluya materes, umar savar mechitza tluya eina materes. This is a machlekes with regard to Shabbos, really. And the question is, if you have a hanging mechitza tluya means a hanging mechitza. In other words, the mechitza doesn't reach the ground. With regard to Shabbos, is that considered a mechitza or not? To make it a rishus hayachid, to separate the rishuyos. So one opinion holds mechitza tluya is a good mechitza, it does separate, and one says a hanging mechitza, if it doesn't reach the ground, it's not a good mechitza, it doesn't separate. So that's the machlokes in our Mishnah too. Obviously, Rabbi Yossi holds that mechitza tluya is good, and the concept over here that they're arguing with is, we may have mentioned it briefly earlier in the Masechta, we'll get into it a little more also later. There's a concept called good achis. Good achis is, it's a halachic, it's not a physical wall, but it's a halachic wall. It's a halacha mashim Sinai that we learned that you can say good achis. Good achis means that even if the wall only goes down a little bit, we look at it as if it goes down all the way. So Rabbi Yossi says we do apply the concept of good achis over here, and the Tanakama apparently is saying we don't apply the concept of good achis. We also have a similar concept called good asik. Good asik means that the walls go up, even though that's the concept that if you make, according to the Tanakama, if you make a wall from the ground up and it's 10 tvachim high, and it doesn't reach the schach, we look at it as if it's all walled in, because the good asik tells me that the wall continues up until the top. Okay? Another concept that we actually mentioned in this Mishnah, I should have spoken out there also, which we're going to get to on Amud Beis, is this concept of lavud. Lavud we came to a few times already in the Masechta, but lavud is anything within 3 tvachim is any space which is within 3 tvachim, up till 3 tvachim, is non-existent. It's as if it's not there, that space. So if you have these walls which start from the top of your sukkah and end within 3 from the ground, so there's only a space of, let's say, 2.9, you look at that space as if it's not there. That's what lavud does. Lavud closes up the space.
What's the difference between lavud and...
Good achis, there's no limit. And good asik, there's no limit. Even if you have a little bit of wall on the top, if you say good achis, it'll bring it all the way down to the bottom.
But doesn't that cover the...
Yeah, you won't need lavud in that case. But lavud, if you do need to be enclosed in a physical wall, then lavud, lavud is very common. Let's say on Shabbos, you need to have a mechitza. To be in Rosh Hashanah, you have to be enclosed by walls, right? So if you have a wall with a space in it, does that ruin your whole wall? So every time you have a space, if it's less than 3, the space is as if it's not there. As long as the space is less than 3 tvachim. For sukkah also. So if your walls have spaces in it of less than 3 tvachim, we'll see on Amud Beis, that's good. That's still good. It's as if the wall is there. It fills up that space. The schach too. If you have an airspace of less than 3 tvachim in your schach, it's as if it's closed. Okay? So he said mechitza tluya, right? Now, Tanan Hasam. We're 5 lines from the bottom of Tez Zayin Amud Aleph. Tanan Hasam, we learned over there in Shabbos. I think it's Shabbos, right? Erevin. Shabbos and Erevin, okay. Tanan Hasam, Bar Shebein Shtei Chatzeros, Ein Memalin Mimena B'Shabbos. If you have a pit, it's a pretty deep pit apparently, like we'll see in a second, and there's water in it, that's where your source of water is, like you have a well, let's say, in the backyard. But this well is right on the border between 2 backyards, let's say, 2 courtyards, 2 chatzeros. Bar shebein shtei chatzeros, ein memalin mimena b'Shabbos. You can't fill up, so obviously talking about where there's no eruv. So now, midaraisa, minatayra, you're allowed to carry from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah. But the Chazal instituted that you're not allowed to carry even from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah unless you have an eruv. So in this situation, you have 2 yards next to each other, and there is no eruv between one and the other. So you and your neighbor share a piece of property. Half of it is yours, half of it is his. And right in the middle, there's a pit. And we don't have an eruv between our 2 things. And there's even a wall going across, a fence going across our two chatzeros. And there's a pit where we get our water from in the middle. Half of the pit is in my side, half of the pit is in your side. But now the water in the middle doesn't stay from my side to your side, right? The water in the pit mixes. So if I take out a cup of water from the pit, even though I didn't go onto his side, the water, since it mixes all around in the pit, I'm taking, technically what I'm doing is, I could be taking water from your chutzner and bringing it into my chutzner. And now I'm transferring from one chutzner to another chutzner, which is aser b'derabanan. You need an eruv for that. So let's say I have a fence in my field, in my yard. It separates the 2 yards, but it doesn't separate the water, because the water is below. You didn't make this fence to separate for the water. You only made the separation, the fence, to separate between my yard and your yard, but not for the water. So therefore, it doesn't work. So bar shebein shtei chatzeres ein memalin mimena b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to fill up from this bar, from this pit on Shabbos. Ela im kein asala mechitza, unless you made a special mechitza, special separation of asara tvachim, of 10 tvachim. You have like a piece of wall of 10 tvachim. Bein milmala, bein milmata, bein b'toich oignai. Whether it's above or below, but all within the well, within the pit, below ground, right? Or, so Rashi takes out milmala over here. So you have bein milmata means inside the pit next to the water. Doesn't have to be in the water, but near the water. And or bein b'toich oignai means as long as it's anywhere in that hole, even if it's close to the top, far from, even if the water is much deeper down, it works. So the concept, like we were explaining in the Mishnah, is the same concept. Since you made a wall special for the water here, it works even though it's not actually separating the water. The water's still mixing. You look at the wall as if it goes down to the ground and it's separating the water. It's this concept of good achis.
So it doesn't have to go to the ground.
It doesn't have to go to the ground. In fact, it doesn't go to the ground. The question is just, like we'll see, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, we'll turn the page. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, it's a machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says milmala, inside the pit on the top, it could be. Beis Hillel, milmata. It has to be inside the pit, but closer to the water, lower down. But nobody says it has to be cutting the water in half.
But even if the water is, say, 4 ounces deep?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. As long as you have a wall, which is halachically considered a wall, which is 10 tvachim, you look at the wall as if it goes down to the ground. So the difference between just having the fence in your yard and having the piece of the wall inside the pit is because since you made the wall specifically for the water, that's why it works. You do apply the concept of good achis, and the wall goes all the way down to the bottom. But if you just have a fence separating the 2 yards, it wasn't made specifically for the water, then it doesn't help to separate for the water. It has to be made specifically for the water.
And we have this case already with the inverted L's that we had.
Inverted L's?
The L's. Around the pit, around the water, we had the 4 that we put in.
Pasi biros.
Pasi biros, it's not in the pit. That's different.
But I'm saying the fact that it's surrounding that pit.
They're doing 2 different things.
It's different thing.
One is making.
That won't help with the water.
That won't help if the wall. Over there, what you're doing with the Pasi biros is you're enclosing an area. Now that pit is in an enclosed area.
It allows you to take the water.
So you can take the water, is in Rosh Hashanah, and outside the pit is in Rosh Hashanah. Here, in middle of the pit, it changes Rishuyos. Half the pit is in one Rishus, half the pit is in another Rishus. So in order to split the water, you have to have something made specifically for the water. So according to the first opinion in this Brisa, or in this Mishnah over there, if you made, it could be anywhere in the pit, as long as it's made for the water, it splits it, and you can transfer, you can take water from the pit on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says, one line down, Rabbi Yehuda, you don't need to make a special wall inside the pit. The fence, the wall that's already in the chutzner, splitting the 2 yards, that works for the water too. You don't need to make anything specific for the water. So you see over here that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you apply the concept of mechitza tluya. Mechitza tluya is materes. This hanging mechitza, even though it's hanging over the pit and it's not inside the pit, you look at it as if it goes down into the pit and it separates the two rishuyos. And now each one could transfer water. Each one could take water out. Okay, Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Bar Chana says the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yehuda that says you don't need anything special for the water. Even the hanging mechitza on top is good enough. V'shitas Rabbi Yosi Amra. He must be Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah talking about the pit is the same as Rabbi Yosi in our Mishnah that says you can have a wall for your sukkah way up high, even though it doesn't come near the ground. It's 10 tvachim above near the schach. Even though it's hanging, it must be. It's the same shita, right? Rabbi Yehuda b'shitas Rabbi Yosi Amra. The Amar mechitza tluya materes. He says a hanging mechitza is materes. It separates. It works for a wall. It acts as a mechitza, so it's good for your sukkah. Says the Gemara, no. V'lohi. You can't say that. Loi Rabbi Yehuda savar lak Rabbi Yosi. V'loi Rabbi Yosi savar lak Rabbi Yehuda. one doesn't hold. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold like Rabbi Yehuda. What does that mean? Rabbi Yossi says his halacha with regard to Sukkah. Rabbi Yehuda says his halacha with regard to Shabbos. They each don't agree with each other. So even if Rabbi Yehuda says it by Shabbos, it doesn't mean he says it by Sukkah. And if Rabbi Yossi says it by Sukkah, it doesn't mean by Shabbos. Right? So both ways. And the Gemara will explain. Leib Rabbi Yehuda savar lak Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda, who says his halacha with regard to Shabbos, the mechitza by the bar. That if it's above the bar, it's good. He doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi. Why? Ad kan like Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says his halacha only until Hasam over there, Ela be'eruv v'chatzeres, which is halacha with regard to eruv v'chatzeres, making an eruv between two chatzers, which is both rishus hayachids technically according to the Torah. It's all the Rabbanan. Chazal instituted that we have to make a separation. You have to make an eruv in order to carry from one rishus hayachid to rishus hayachid. But the whole concept is only the Rabbanan. Aval hacha sukkah deraisa. Sukkah is deraisa. You need to have walls, but we learn that from the psukim, right? So therefore, he's more strict. So Rabbi Yehuda says, no, I wouldn't agree to Rabbi Yossi that you can have a hanging mechitza by a sukkah because there we're more strict because it's deraisa. V'lo Rabbi Yossi savalak Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi, where it says you can have a hanging mechitza by sukkah, wouldn't agree to Rabbi Yehuda by Shabbos. Why? Ad kan like Amar Rabbi Yossi hacha. Rabbi Yossi only says his halacha here by sukkah. Ela b'sukkah the mitzvah sasei, because it's a mitzvah sasei. The Torah says you should make a sukkah. Mitzvah sasei. Midaraisa, it's chamor, but it's not as chamor. Avol Shabbos, the Isser Skila, even though this specific halacha that we're talking about on Shabbos, having this mechitza, is only a halacha derabanan. Chazal instituted that you should have these eruvin, but the whole Shabbos in general is a much more chamor thing because you're involving Isser Skila. Shabbos, right? So therefore, loy. So even though Rabbi Yossi would allow it by sukkah, for mitzvah saseh he would allow it, but for Shabbos, even though it's only the Rabbanan, but for Shabbos, in general, Shabbos is much more chomer because there's Isser Skila involved, and therefore he wouldn't allow the mechitza above the bar. So both don't hold of each other. The im toimar, if you're saying that now, so Rabbi Yossi, we're saying, says it's halacha by sukkah, you can have a hanging mechitza, but not by Shabbos. If that's the case, asks the Gemara, the im toimar, ma'aseh shenasa b'tzipori al pi mi nasa. The story, the famous story that happened in Tzipori, which the Gemara will tell us in a second what it is, who allowed them to use that hanging wall? We'll see in a second what it is. They used the hanging wall on Shabbos in the city of Tzipori. And whose psak did they use? Because Rashi explains that Rabbi Yossi was the Rosh HaYeshiva, Rashi says, of the city of Tzipori. So if he was the head of the city of Tzipori and they allowed this, it must be he did allow a hanging mechitza even on Shabbos. And here the Gemara is saying that Rabbi Yossi doesn't agree with Rabbi Yehuda for Shabbos, only for Sukkah. So the Gemara says, Elo alpi loy alpi Rabbi Yossi. It wasn't the psak of Rabbi Yossi which they used in Tzipori. Elo alpi Rabbi Yishmael b'Rabbi Yossi. It was his son. It was after Rabbi Yossi was already nifter, and his son took over as the rabbi, and he permitted the use of this hanging mechitza. And now we're going to explain what the story is. So what's the story? The Chiyasa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came, he once came, I guess, visiting the city of Tzipori. Omar, he came when he came, I guess, to Bavel.
Bavel, yeah.
When he came to Bavel, he said over the story. He said like this: Pam achas, one time, shakchu v'lo haviu sefer Torah me'erev Shabbos. They forgot to bring the sefer Torah to the shul on Shabbos. So Rashi explains before they didn't bring it before Shabbos. So Rashi explains two scenarios what we could be talking about over here. Either you have that the shul shared a courtyard with other houses, like you have sometimes more than one house open to one courtyard, right? So the shul was open to the same courtyard as other houses, but they didn't make a eruv in order to carry into that shared courtyard. We said earlier also you have to make an eruv between everybody. They forgot to make an eruv. And they used to keep the Sefer Torah in one of the houses. So I guess for security reasons, they used to keep the Sefer Torah in one of the houses, and on Shabbos they brought it over. But they didn't make a eruv. So now how do they transfer the Sefer Torah from the house to the shul? That's one scenario that we're talking about. Or Rashi says we're talking about the Sefer Torah was in the house. The house was open to a mavoi, and other chatzeros, other courtyards were open to that same mavoi. So you have to make a shituf mavois. So what happened? What happened here? The next day, Pirsu Sadinin al Gabi Ha'amudin, they spread a sheet over the posts that were already in place. They have used Sefer Torah, v'karubai, and they brought the Sefer Torah and they read in it.
Where they read in the shul?
They read in the shul. They carried the Sefer Torah.
How does that help with doing that?
How does it help by doing what?
Putting those sheets.
So like this. So we'll go with the second scenario in Rashi. It seems like that was, if he said it second, that was the one he liked better. So you have we have a courtyard. Let's say you have a cul-de-sac, a street which everybody uses, a shared area, and open to that street there's a bunch of different courtyards, and on each courtyard there's a bunch of different houses. So let's say each chutzner itself had an eruv, but they didn't have anything connecting all the chatzeres to each other in order to carry in the shared area, which was the mavoi. Now the shul was open directly to the mavoi. Right across from the shul was the house where the Sefer Torah was. Okay, right across the street from the shul. And the Sefer Torah was in a house with a courtyard. So it had one chatzer and one house. Across the street of the mavoi is the shul. So the poles separated those two, the shul and that chatzer with that house.
What poles?
There were poles in place. There were some poles there. Okay, so those poles separated the shul and that chutzner across the street with the house and that chutzner from the rest of the mavoi. So they took a sheet and they put it over the poles. Now you have a mechitza, you have a wall separating one half of the mavoi with all those other chatzeres open to it, and just the shul and that house. And the halacha is that if you have only one chutzner in a mavoi, you don't have to make a sheet of mavois. You don't have to make a special eruv to carry from that chutzner to the mavoi, because the whole concept of making a sheet of mavois is when you have more than one chutzner open to the mavoi, which is a shared area. So we're worried that it's going to be similar to Rishus Harabim. You have a more private area open to a more shared area that's similar to Rishus Hayachid to Rishus Harabim, and you have to make a mechitza, or you have to make an eruv. But if you only have one chutzner open to one mavoi, there's no problem. So since the shul was open directly to the mavoi, and you only had one chutzner, which that house opened to, you're allowed to carry if you have a wall separating the rest of the mavoi.
How do you get away with building a wall on Shabbos?
Yeah.
So that's a good question.
They do this Erev Shabbos, no?
What? No. They did it on Shabbos. They did it on Shabbos. So first, there's two problems. First of all, how'd they get the sheet? How'd they carry the sheet out there? Right? So that's the Gemara's question. The second, we'll see in a second. The second question is, it's not necessarily a problem of building a wall on Shabbos. It's a problem of building an oihel on Shabbos. But if the wall is just straight up without having anything going overhead, so that's not a problem. But let's ask, the Gemara's going to ask the other question.
It's just considered mechitza, right?
It's considered a mechitza, right? And therefore you don't need an eruv, right? So the Gemara asks, Pirsu salka daitach? They spread out a sheet on Shabbos? Is that what you're saying? Mehechan heviim? Where did they bring it from? They can't bring it out for Shabbos, right? Ela matzu sadinin prusin al gabe ha'amudin. They found that the sheet was already spread over the pole. It was done like that before Shabbos, like you're saying, but it didn't reach the ground. They still, even though it was a mechitza tluya, it was a hanging mechitza, they still used it to carry the Sefer Torah across the street.
So they put it up, or they
didn't put it up on Shabbos.
There the whole time?
It was there the whole time, but the chiddush was they were saimech that it was a mechitza tluya. So we're asking, how could you use a mechitza tluya? We thought Rabbi Yossi, who was the Rav of that city, later we say it's not Rabbi Yossi, it was his son, but Rabbi Yossi only says it by SUKKAH, not by Shabbos. Here you say they used it by Shabbos. So the answer is it was his son, it wasn't Rabbi Yossi himself. Okay. That's the end of that story. Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Avimi. Rav Chisda said in the name of Avimi, Machzelas, a mat, arba umashahu. So we're talking about the height. So imagine a sukkah, like we said before, it has 4 poles, and your schach is going to be kosher schach. Okay, let's say you put your schach on later, but so now you have we're not talking about the length or the width. That's good. The height of the wall is 4 tfachim and a little bit. So let's say you have a sukkah which is okay, let's see it in time. Machzelas arba'u mashu, if it's 4 and a little bit, materes besukkah mishum doifen. It works as a wall for a sukkah. It's good for a wall. Even though we said you have to have a minimum of 10 tvachim for a wall, if you have a wall, we're saying here at 4 tvachim and a little bit, it's okay. How? Heichi avid. How did you do it? Tali Leib emtza. You hung it somehow in the middle. So let's say you have a sukkah which is 10 tvachim high, which is the minimum height of your sukkah, and you put the 4 plus 4 and a bit tefach wall in the middle. Pachis mishloisha lamata, upachis mishloisha lamayla. You left a space of less than 3 below, and less than 3 above. And what did we say earlier? V'chol pachis mishloisha kalavudami. We already know that anything within 3 is lavud, as if that space doesn't exist. It's as if it's all closed up. So the Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious. We already know the concept of lavud. So what are you teaching me here that I don't know? Mahu detema, what would I have said? Chad lavud amrinan, trei lavud la amrinan, kamash malan. This teaching of Rav Chisda is telling us a special chiddush. We wouldn't know that you could apply 2 lavuds to the same wall. Maybe you can only say one time lavud. Rabbi Chis is saying no, you can say lavud on the top and lavud on the bottom at the same time, and it's kosher.
How many walls can you get away with that?
Why not all three?
All three.
It seems like all three. Meisvei, the Gemara challenges from a Brisa. It says in the Brisa, "Machzelas shiva umashahu materes besukkah." The Brisa says that if you have a mat that you're using as a wall, if it's 7 and a little bit, it's good. What does that sound like? It sounds like it's attached to the top, and it's less than 3 from the bottom. So that's why it's good. But you can't use the lavud 2 times. That's what it sounds like from the Brisa. Otherwise, if the Brisa would have wanted to tell us a chiddush of lavud, it would have told us you could have even 4 and a little bit. Why 7 and a little bit? And for the Gemara, hahi b'sukkah gedalia. That's talking about a big sukkah, a very tall sukkah. And he started from the schach. Umay kamash malon to mishal shlun defanos malmala lamata Rabbi Yosi. We're telling us the same chiddush as Rabbi Yosi, that you're allowed to have a sukkah very high up as long as the wall is 7.5 tvachim. So you started a little less than 3 from the schach. So you say lavud as if it's attached, and now you have a 10 tefach wall all the way up there, and you have a big space down to the ground. So that's like a mechitza tzvi, like Rabbi said. That's good for sukkah.
So it makes no difference how big the space is below.
It makes no difference as long as your schach is not 20 amos above the ground. It doesn't make a difference. As
so
long
with lavud, it's more than 10 tefachim.
No, you don't need the love on the bottom. You're not using lavud. You're only going to use lavud on the top. We're saying if the wall is 7 plus tefachim, so you put it within 3 of the schach. So now it's 7 and a little bit, and 2.9. Let's say 7.1 and 2.9. You have 10. You have your 10 tefachim hanging, and then as much as the space, you could have as big space as you want going down to the floor. That's what
much as you want.
Yeah, as much as you want. That's what this Bryce is telling us.
Because you have the 10.
Because you have the 10 tvachim, that makes it a wall. Once you have a wall, we say this concept called good achis, which brings it down to the floor. Brings it down to the floor. Mechitza tzluya works. So that's our Yoshi's chiddush.
It feels funny.
It feels funny, yeah.
An open space there.
Amar Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami says. Okay, so what we discussed till now was the height of the wall. Now we're discussing the dimension. We're not talking about the height. We're talking about the width of the wall, like the length of the wall. Amar Rab Ami, pasar bo mashahu. You need to have for your sukkah. You need to have 3 walls, right? So let's say you have. Really, you only need 2 walls and a little bit. So let's say you have 1 wall. And then for your second wall, you only have a board which is 4 tvachim and a little bit. That's how wide the board is. Mater b'sukkah mishum doifen. It works for a sukkah as a wall. Umukim le, where do you put it to make it work? Umukim le b'pachos mishleisha tvachim samach doifen. So you put it within 3 of the existing wall. So let's say you have 1 wall over here. You put the other one within 3 tvachim on an L, but the space you leave between those 2 walls at the corner, at the angle. And then if you have less than 3 space over there, and you have 4 plus till the end, it'll equal 7, because again the lavud closes up that space. And again, what's the chiddush? We already know that lavud works. It's coming to teach us an added thing that the smallest size kosher sukkah is 7 tvachim. So that if you add it up, 4 plus, and you have the lavud, you have a good sukkah. Have a wonderful day.